Averroës, or Ibn Rushd, was one of the most influential philosophers in the Islamic Golden Age. His works have shaped not only Islamic philosophy but also the intellectual traditions of the West, particularly through his commentaries on Aristotle. Averroës' contributions span a wide range of subjects, from logic and metaphysics to medicine and jurisprudence. His advocacy for the compatibility of reason and faith offers a unique lens through which to examine spiritual practices, such as those observed during Ramadan. In this video, we will delve into the life and lessons of Averroës, examining how his philosophical principles can illuminate the significance and practice of Ramadan. From his emphasis on reason and rationality to his insights on self-discipline, ethics, and the unity of knowledge and faith, Averroës provides a deep, multi-layered framework for understanding the month of Ramadan beyond its religious observance. Averroës' philosophical foundation: reason and faith in harmony. Averroës was a firm believer in the idea that reason and faith could coexist. His philosophical works often focused on reconciling the teachings of Islam with the ideas of Aristotle, whom he greatly admired. Averroës argued that philosophy and religion, when properly understood, do not contradict one another. Instead, both are pathways to the truth, faith offering spiritual guidance and reason providing intellectual clarity. This harmony between reason and faith is crucial to understanding how Averroës might approach the spiritual and ethical practices of Ramadan. The role of reason in understanding religion. Averroës' intellectual legacy rests heavily on his belief that human beings should use reason to interpret religious texts. For him, faith alone was insufficient for understanding the deeper meanings of existence. Reason, particularly the philosophical tools handed down by Aristotle, was necessary to grasp the underlying principles of the universe and the divine order. In his commentaries on Aristotle, Averroës advocates for a rational approach to religion, suggesting that the Quran encourages individuals to think critically and use their intellect to better understand divine truths. In the context of Ramadan, this rational approach can be seen as an invitation to reflect deeply on the purpose of the fast. Ramadan is not only about abstaining from food and drink, it is a time for introspection, self-discipline, and spiritual awakening. For Averroës, engaging the mind during Ramadan would mean reflecting on the deeper philosophical and ethical reasons behind fasting. Why do we fast? What is the purpose of self-denial? How can fasting bring us closer to our higher selves and to God? Lesson from Averroës. During Ramadan, seek to understand the deeper spiritual meaning behind fasting. Use both reason and faith to reflect on the importance of self-discipline and its role in personal growth. Ramadan is not just a time for physical deprivation but an opportunity for intellectual and spiritual enlightenment. The ethics of self-discipline, mastering the self through fasting. Averroës' philosophy is deeply rooted in ethics. His ethical theory draws heavily on the Aristotelian notion of achieving virtue through the balance of reason and desire. Averroës believed that humans must practice self-discipline in order to achieve the highest form of happiness or eudaimonia. This happiness is not derived from material wealth or sensory pleasures but from living a life of virtue, guided by reason and self-control. Self-discipline as the path to virtue. In his writings, Averroës emphasized the importance of mastering one's passions and desires. For him, the greatest obstacle to achieving a virtuous life was the uncontrolled appetites and emotions that lead individuals astray. In this sense, he mirrored many of the Stoics, who believed that self-discipline was essential for moral development. Fasting during Ramadan embodies the principle of self-discipline in a very tangible way. By abstaining from food, drink, and other sensory pleasures, Muslims practice control over their physical desires, and in doing so, they develop greater awareness of their inner spiritual needs. Averroës would likely see Ramadan as an excellent opportunity for individuals to strengthen their willpower, not just to refrain from food but to cultivate control over all aspects of their lives, including their thoughts and emotions. Lesson from Averroës. Ramadan provides an ideal opportunity to practice self-discipline. Use the month as a time to reflect on areas of your life where you may lack control, whether it's over your desires, thoughts, or emotions. Through fasting, learn to master your impulses and strive toward greater virtue. The purpose of fasting: purification and self-reflection. Fasting is a central pillar of Ramadan, and it holds deep spiritual significance in Islam. It is seen as a means of purifying the soul, of cleansing oneself from worldly distractions, and of growing closer to God. Averroës, with his emphasis on the integration of reason and spirituality, would likely view fasting not as an end in itself, but as a tool for achieving higher spiritual and intellectual goals. Fasting as a means of intellectual and spiritual growth. Averroës believed that human beings were not merely physical creatures but intellectual and spiritual beings who sought to understand the deeper truths of existence. Fasting, in this regard, can be seen as a means of clearing the mind and focusing on higher truths. By depriving oneself of physical comforts, individuals can focus more intently on their spiritual growth and intellectual pursuits. Fasting during Ramadan can be understood as a time for both physical and mental purification. On a physical level, fasting allows the body to rest and reset. On a mental and spiritual level, it offers a space for deep reflection, a chance to examine one's relationship with God and with the world around them. Averroës would likely encourage Muslims to use Ramadan as an opportunity not only for prayer and self-denial but also for intellectual reflection, perhaps even philosophical contemplation. Lesson from Averroës. View fasting as an opportunity to purify both your body and mind. Use this time to reflect deeply on your values, your beliefs, and your relationship with God. Ramadan is a time for both physical and intellectual renewal. Charity and the common good, the ethical dimension of giving. Averroës was a proponent of the idea that ethical living extends beyond personal virtue to include the welfare of society. He believed that the common good should be a central concern of moral philosophy. This idea resonates strongly with the emphasis on charity during Ramadan, which is not only about personal spiritual growth but also about contributing to the well-being of others. The importance of charity in Averroës' ethics. In his works on ethics, Averroës stresses that human beings are inherently social creatures, and our actions should reflect a sense of responsibility toward the common good. He believed that the moral life is not solely about individual achievement but also about contributing to the broader community. This aligns closely with the practices of zakat, almsgiving, and charity during Ramadan, where Muslims are encouraged to share their wealth with those in need. For Averroës, charity is not just an act of kindness but a moral duty that contributes to the ethical fabric of society. By giving to those less fortunate, individuals help to maintain social harmony and justice. Ramadan, then, provides an opportunity to cultivate generosity and selflessness, traits that are vital for the well-being of both individuals and society. Lesson from Averroës. Charity is a key aspect of ethical living. During Ramadan, engage in acts of charity not only as a religious obligation but as a moral duty to contribute to the common good. Consider how your actions can help foster a more just and compassionate society. Balance and harmony, the integration of mind, body, and spirit. Averroës' philosophical system stresses the importance of balance in all aspects of life. He believed that the ideal life is one in which the mind, body, and soul work in harmony. This concept of balance is reflected in the practice of Ramadan, where fasting involves both physical restraint and spiritual focus. the integration of mind, body, and soul. For Averroës, living a virtuous life meant achieving a balance between various aspects of one's being. The mind should guide the passions and desires, but these desires should not be repressed entirely. Rather, they should be channeled in a way that serves the higher purpose of achieving virtue and understanding. During Ramadan, this balance is key. Fasting is not merely a physical act but a holistic practice that engages the mind, body, and spirit. By abstaining from food and drink, individuals develop greater awareness of their physical needs and desires, but they also create space for spiritual reflection and intellectual growth. The goal of Ramadan is not simply to endure physical hardship but to cultivate a greater sense of unity between the physical, intellectual, and spiritual aspects of life. Lesson from Averroës. Use Ramadan as a time to reflect on the balance between your mind, body, and spirit. Consider how these different aspects of your being can work in harmony to foster a more virtuous and meaningful life. The intellectual and spiritual journey, bridging the rational and the divine. Averroës' philosophy draws on the Aristotelian tradition, where reason and knowledge are seen as essential tools for understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it. This idea fits naturally with the Islamic perspective of the world, as expressed in the Quran, which invites reflection, contemplation, and the pursuit of knowledge. Averroës built upon this foundational belief, arguing that reason, when used correctly, could serve as a guide toward understanding the divine. This intellectual journey is also mirrored in the spiritual journey that Muslims undergo during Ramadan. By using reason and faith together, one embarks on a deeper understanding of both themselves and their relationship with the divine. Reason as a bridge to the divine. Averroës argued that the human intellect is capable of comprehending higher truths, and for him, philosophy was a necessary tool for understanding the divine essence and the nature of the universe. The pursuit of knowledge, which he saw as an intellectual duty, could bring an individual closer to understanding the divine will. This is where Averroës diverged from more strictly theological interpretations of religion. He maintained that rational analysis could enrich faith and guide one towards spiritual enlightenment. During Ramadan, fasting can be viewed as more than an act of obedience. It becomes a journey of self-exploration and intellectual refinement. As Muslims engage in acts of worship and devotion, they are simultaneously called upon to reflect on their intellectual and spiritual paths. Averroës' emphasis on reason suggests that one should use Ramadan as an opportunity to delve into intellectual practices, studying religious texts, reflecting on the teachings of the Quran, and engaging in philosophical discourse that enriches their spiritual practices. Lesson from Averroës: approach Ramadan as a time for intellectual and spiritual reflection. Use reason to explore the deeper meanings of fasting, prayer, and devotion. The practice of Ramadan can be seen as a harmonious convergence of rational thought and spiritual growth. The role of reflection and contemplation in Ramadan. Averroës valued deep intellectual reflection as essential for achieving both personal growth and understanding of the divine. His works, particularly his commentaries on Aristotle, suggest that humans should strive for clarity and wisdom in their thinking. Reflection, for Averroës, was not just a passive activity but an active engagement with one's intellectual and moral life. In Ramadan, reflection becomes one of the core practices that allow Muslims to transform their spiritual and intellectual understanding. The practice of contemplation. Ramadan is a time of introspection, where individuals step back from the busy rhythms of daily life to reflect on their actions, desires, and spiritual practices. The act of fasting itself requires a form of self-reflection. Each moment of hunger or thirst becomes an opportunity to pause and reflect on one's inner state. This is not only about physical deprivation, it's an invitation to examine the quality of one's thoughts, behaviors, and intentions. Averroës would likely interpret this as an essential part of the intellectual and spiritual journey. Reflection during Ramadan can be seen as an intellectual exercise, an examination of one's life, intentions, and the alignment between one's actions and higher moral principles. Furthermore, Averroës would stress the importance of rational contemplation during this time. For him, intellectual reflection was a tool that could refine both one's spiritual life and ethical actions. Ramadan, then, becomes a time to sharpen the mind and the soul, refining one's ability to reflect on and understand the greater truths that lie beneath our everyday experiences. Lesson from Averroës: use Ramadan as a time of deep contemplation and self-reflection. Engage in philosophical reflection, focusing on the alignment between your actions and values. This practice can enrich both your intellectual life and your spiritual growth. The philosophical meaning of suffering and self-denial. Averroës' philosophy often engaged with the ideas of human suffering, self-denial, and the role of pain in the pursuit of virtue. In his interpretation of Aristotle, Averroës argued that suffering and hardship could play a constructive role in moral development. By facing challenges and overcoming them through virtue and rational thinking, individuals could strengthen their character and grow toward intellectual and ethical excellence. Suffering as a path to virtue. Fasting during Ramadan can be seen as a form of self-denial that involves enduring physical discomfort for a greater spiritual goal. The act of fasting itself can be challenging, as it forces individuals to confront their dependence on worldly pleasures like food and drink. Yet, this suffering is not seen as meaningless or as an end in itself. Rather, it is a means of purifying the soul and developing greater moral and spiritual strength. For Averroës, suffering is not something to be avoided at all costs. It serves as a vehicle for moral and intellectual growth. Ramadan embodies this idea by encouraging Muslims to endure hardship in pursuit of a higher purpose, cultivating piety, self-control, and empathy for those who suffer. Through fasting, Muslims are reminded of the suffering of others, especially the poor and hungry. This recognition of suffering encourages acts of charity and compassion, both of which are integral to the Ramadan experience. Lesson from Averroës: embrace the challenges of Ramadan as an opportunity for moral and spiritual growth. Understand that suffering, when faced with intention and rational clarity, can lead to greater virtue and empathy. Use this time to develop resilience and deepen your commitment to ethical principles. Rationality, virtue, and the role of community during Ramadan. Averroës was not just concerned with individual morality, he also emphasized the importance of the community and its role in promoting ethical values. He believed that individuals should act in ways that contribute to the common good, recognizing that human beings are inherently social creatures who are part of a larger community. In his view, a virtuous society is one in which individuals seek not only their own happiness but also the well-being of others.